The first thing my mother said wasn't good morning, it was, your sister needs your car more. So why was my driveway empty before I even knew anyone had taken it? Why had my SUV disappeared overnight? And why was there an email from the Ohio BMV saying an ownership transfer was already pending under my name? I wasn't looking at the family favor anymore. I was staring at the beginning of something that could permanently strip away property I'd worked years to buy. The missing SUV was only the first piece. Someone had already started building a paper trail behind my back. Before we get into this, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. If stories about family boundaries, truth, and standing up for yourself resonate with you, I'd love to have you subscribe and stay with me for the rest of this journey. I had exactly 23 minutes before the first meeting on my calendar. Normally, I would have grabbed my laptop bag, started my SUV, and driven to the office while listening to a business podcast. Instead, I stood barefoot on my front porch in Dublin, Ohio, staring at the empty rectangle where my vehicle had been parked every night for the past 3 years. I called my mother back. "Mom, where is my car?" "I already told you," Linda said, sounding almost annoyed that I had asked again. "Ashley needed it." "You don't just take someone's car." "It isn't forever." "Where is it?" There was a pause. "You always make everything so dramatic." That sentence hit harder than I expected, because I'd heard some version of it my entire life. When Ashley forgot to repay money she'd borrowed, I was dramatic. When my parents volunteered me to host Thanksgiving because Ashley was overwhelmed, I was dramatic. When they gave Ashley my old bedroom after I'd specifically asked them to leave it untouched while I finished renovating my house, I was dramatic. Apparently, having boundaries was just another word for selfishness in my family. "I'm calling the police if you don't tell me where my SUV is." Linda sighed loudly. "Don't embarrass this family over something that can be worked out." Something. She had just called my $38,000 SUV something. The call ended before I could answer. I looked down at my phone again. The email from the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles was still open. Subject ownership transfer pending verification. At first, I'd assumed it was spam. Now it felt like a warning. I clicked through the secure portal and logged into my BMV account using the multi-factor authentication on my phone. A loading wheel spun for several seconds before my vehicle information appeared. There it was, my VIN, my license plate, my registration, then another line I had never seen before. Transfer request status pending final verification. My stomach tightened. Someone had actually started paperwork. I immediately called my manager. "Hey Daniel, I'm dealing with what might be identity fraud. I need a personal day." He didn't hesitate. "Take whatever time you need. We'll cover your meetings." I appreciated that he asked no unnecessary questions. Within 30 minutes, I was sitting inside the local BMV office waiting for my number to be called. The waiting room smelled faintly of printer toner and coffee. People around me looked bored. I felt like my entire life had tilted sideways. "Number B214. I walked to the counter. The employee smiled politely. "How can I help you today?" "I believe someone filed paperwork to transfer ownership of my vehicle." She asked for my driver's license. After typing for nearly a minute, her expression changed. "I do see an application." My pulse quickened. "Has ownership already changed?" "No." I finally exhaled. "It's still pending." "Pending because of what?" "There are additional verification steps that haven't been completed." "So whoever submitted this hasn't finished the process." I leaned closer. "Can you tell me who submitted it?" "I'm afraid I can't disclose personal information associated with the application." "Can you at least tell me if I submitted it?" She looked directly at me. "The application includes your electronic signature." I stared at her. "I never signed anything." She nodded slowly. If that's true, you'll need to complete a fraud report immediately. She printed several forms. This will temporarily place a hold on the transfer while the investigation begins. Relief washed over me. At least the process wasn't finished. But another thought immediately replaced it. Who had my signature? The employee continued. The application wasn't filed directly through this office. It wasn't... No. She pointed to a line on the screen. It came through a licensed title and registration agency. So someone physically went somewhere? Yes. That meant planning, documents, preparation. This wasn't Ashley borrowing my SUV because hers was in the shop. Someone had tried to move ownership through legal channels. I filled out every fraud form they handed me. Before leaving, I asked one more question. If someone had completed the verification before I noticed, she gave me a sympathetic look. It would have been much harder to reverse. Outside, I sat in my rideshare instead of asking the driver to leave immediately. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I opened my call log. 7 missed calls from Mom, 3 from Ashley, 1 voicemail. I played Ashley's first. Morgan, please don't overreact. Overreact? Interesting choice of words. I know this looks bad, but Mom was only trying to help me. Trying to help by transferring my vehicle. I've got the kids every other week now. My car keeps breaking down. I just need something reliable. If she'd simply asked, I probably would have driven her children to school myself until she figured things out. Instead, someone forged paperwork. Another voicemail came from my mother. You've always had more than your sister. God blessed you with a better job. Families share. No, families ask. Families don't quietly rewrite ownership records. My phone buzzed again. Ashley. This time I answered. Morgan. Her voice sounded exhausted. I didn't want this to happen like this. What exactly happened? Silence. Then she said something that made me stop breathing for a second. The paperwork was already started before I knew Mom had actually gone through with it. What paperwork? I thought she was only asking questions. Ashley. Another silence. I never asked her to steal your car. Steal. That was the first honest word anyone had used all morning. So where is it? It's safe. Where? I can't tell you. Why? Because Mom said you'd report it stolen. I am reporting it stolen. Ashley inhaled sharply. You'd actually do that. I absolutely would. She hung up. For several minutes, I simply sat there. Not because I didn't know what to do, because I finally understood something. Ashley wasn't leading this. She was following. Mom was the one moving every piece across the board. That afternoon, I returned home to collect every document I had related to the SUV. Purchase contract, loan payoff confirmation, insurance policy, registration, maintenance records. As I opened the filing cabinet in my home office, I frowned. The insurance renewal envelope wasn't where I remembered leaving it. Neither was the folder containing copies of my vehicle documents. Maybe I'd moved them. Maybe I searched every drawer. Nothing. Then my phone vibrated. My smart doorbell app had uploaded archived footage after completing a cloud sync. One notification caught my eye. Motion detected. 3 days ago, 10:17 a.m., I had been in the office at that exact time. I tapped the video. The image loaded. A familiar figure walked confidently up my front steps. She didn't knock. She reached into her purse, pulled out a key, and unlocked my front door. I watched the video 3 times before I could convince myself I wasn't imagining it. The timestamp was clear. Friday, 10:17 a.m. The woman unlocking my front door wasn't a stranger. It was my mother. Linda moved with the confidence of someone who had done it before. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind her. The recording ended because my exterior camera only captured the front porch. I immediately opened the app connected to my smart deadbolt. Every time the lock was opened, whether by keypad, phone, or physical key, it generated an activity log. There it was, Friday, 10:17 a.m., manual key entry, 10:41 a.m., door locked, 24 minutes. My mother had been inside my house for nearly half an hour while I was leading a project meeting downtown. I leaned back in my chair and covered my mouth. I had never imagined needing evidence against my own family. When I bought the house 4 years earlier, my parents had insisted on keeping a spare key just in case. It had seemed reasonable. If there was a water leak or a medical emergency, someone should be able to get inside. I had never once imagined that just in case would become permission in my mother's mind. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. What now? I saw the camera footage. Silence. You used your key to enter my house. I needed to pick something up. You didn't ask. I didn't think I had to. I closed my eyes for a second. What exactly did you take? It wasn't stealing. I didn't ask if you thought it was stealing. Another pause. I borrowed a few papers. My grip tightened around the phone. What papers? You already know. No, Mom, I don't. The car documents. She said it so casually that for a moment I couldn't respond. You broke into my house. I have a key. You entered without permission. I've always had permission. No, I said quietly. You had trust. She laughed softly, almost sadly. Morgan, don't turn this into something ugly. You already did. She ended the call. I sat in complete silence. For years, I'd believed the biggest difference between Ashley and me was that she always asked for help while I figured things out on my own. Now I was beginning to understand the real difference. Ashley had learned she could expect people to solve her problems. I had been expected to absorb everyone else's. I downloaded the camera footage immediately and saved 3 separate copies. One to my laptop, one to an encrypted cloud folder, one to a flash drive I kept in my office safe. If this became a legal dispute, I wasn't going to rely on one app storing one video. Then I gathered every document related to the SUV, the purchase agreement, the financing records showing I'd paid off the loan 8 months earlier, the title confirmation, insurance renewals, bank statements showing every monthly payment had come from my account. Nothing had ever been co-signed. Nothing belonged to anyone except me. The missing pieces were the copies I'd kept in my filing cabinet. Now I knew exactly who had taken them. By noon, I was sitting across from Aaron Sullivan, an attorney a coworker had recommended years earlier after a neighborhood property dispute. Her office wasn't intimidating. Bookshelves lined one wall and framed Ohio Supreme Court opinions hung behind her desk. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The missing SUV, the BMV notification, the forged electronic signature, the security footage, the missing paperwork. When I finished, she folded her hands. I'm going to ask you a question. I nodded. Do you want to solve a family disagreement? I hesitated. I thought I did. And now, I think someone committed fraud. She gave a small nod. Those are 2 very different situations. She requested copies of everything. I transferred the camera footage to her laptop. She replayed it carefully. This is your mother. Yes. You didn't authorize this visit. No. Has she ever entered your home while you weren't there before? Not that I know of. She watched the video again. Then she looked at the activity log from my smart lock. The timestamps match perfectly. Next, she examined the BMV notification. This ownership transfer wasn't completed, she said. That's fortunate. How fortunate. If it had gone through, we'd still have legal options, but reversing everything would have been slower and more expensive. She flipped through the fraud report I'd already filed. You acted quickly. I almost ignored the email. A lot of people would have. She paused before asking another question. Who knew where you kept your vehicle documents? My mother. Anyone else? My sister might have. Anyone outside your family? No. Erin made a note. That narrows things considerably. She explained something I hadn't fully understood. In Ohio, a vehicle title transfer requires supporting documentation. Whoever prepared this application needed personal information that isn't publicly available. So this wasn't random. No. It was planned. Yes. I stared at the legal pad in front of me. Somehow hearing another person say it out loud made it more real. Erin continued. I also want to know whether anyone represented this transfer as a gift. A gift. She turned her monitor toward me. Attached to the transfer application was a checklist prepared by the title agency. Near the bottom was a notation. Gift transfer documentation attached. I frowned. What does that mean? It means whoever submitted the paperwork represented this vehicle as a voluntary gift. I never gifted my SUV to anyone. I know. She leaned back. If someone falsely claims property was a gift, that's an important detail. Because it changes the story they're trying to tell. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't someone borrowing my SUV. This wasn't someone planning to pay me back. Someone had built an entire narrative in writing. According to those documents, I had willingly decided to give my vehicle to my sister. Erin requested one more file from the title agency while we were together. They couldn't release everything immediately, but they agreed to provide copies through the proper legal process. Before I left, Erin looked at me carefully. I know this is your mother. I know. And your sister. I know. Are you prepared for the possibility that this investigation may permanently change those relationships? I looked down at the flash drive sitting on her desk. My relationship with them changed the moment they decided my signature wasn't necessary. For the first time that day, Erin smiled not because anything was funny, but because she understood exactly what I meant. As I reached my car service outside her office, my phone buzzed. A new email had arrived from the licensed title agency. The subject line was short. Requested documentation available. Attached were 3 scanned files. The first was the transfer application. The second was a copy of my driver's license. The third stopped me cold. Its file name read, Gift Affidavit Signed.df. I had never seen it before. I didn't open the attachment in the parking lot. Not because I wasn't curious, because I knew whatever was inside would change how I looked at my family forever. I drove home first, closed every curtain in my living room, made a cup of coffee I never touched, and opened my laptop. The file loaded in seconds. At the top of the page were the words, Affidavit of Motor Vehicle Gift Transfer. Halfway down the document was my name, Morgan Elizabeth Davidson. Below it was a signature that looked close enough to fool someone who had never seen me sign anything in person. But it wasn't mine. The loops were too rounded. The D in Davidson curved backward instead of forward. The date was wrong, and the witness section contained the name of someone I had never met. I zoomed in until the signature filled my screen. If I hadn't signed my name thousands of times over the years, I might have believed it myself. Instead, all I felt was anger. Someone had practiced. Someone had taken their time. Someone had expected this document to survive scrutiny. My phone rang. Ashley. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. I saw the paperwork. She was quiet for several seconds. I figured you would. Did you know there was a gift affidavit? Not exactly. That's not an answer. I knew Mom said the transfer would look cleaner. Cleaner. That word stayed with me. Not honest, not legal, cleaner. So you knew she planned to make it look like I gave you the SUV. I didn't read every page. But you signed yours. Silence. I signed what she put in front of me. You signed documents transferring my vehicle. I trusted her. I laughed once. It wasn't because anything was funny. It seems everyone trusted Mom except me. Ashley sighed. You don't understand what things have been like. Then help me understand. My divorce isn't finished. Ryan stopped covering a lot of expenses after we separated. The kids need rides to school. My credit score dropped after I missed payments. Every bank keeps turning me down. I understand struggling. I know you do. No, I interrupted. You understand struggling. I understand working through it without taking someone else's property. Ashley didn't answer. Finally, she whispered, Mom said you'd eventually forgive us. Us, not her. Us. That single word told me everything. She had known. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every form, but enough. I'm not discussing this anymore, I said. Morgan, if you still have my SUV, don't let anyone sell it. She gasped. What? I know it's listed. She didn't respond. I have proof. The line went dead. I looked at the screen for a few seconds before setting my phone down. Ryan had been telling the truth. The SUV wasn't meant to solve Ashley's transportation problem. It was meant to become cash. An hour later, my doorbell rang. It was Erin. She had called earlier to ask whether she could stop by after another appointment, and I'd agreed. As soon as she walked in, I handed her my laptop. She reviewed the affidavit carefully. I was hoping I'd find obvious signs of forgery. You did? Yes. But, she looked at me. Good for us doesn't always mean obvious to everyone else. She pointed at the signature. Someone copied your signature fairly well. I noticed. But signatures aren't the only thing experts compare. She highlighted the date. They used a digital timestamp that doesn't match when the application was supposedly signed. Next, she pointed to another section. The witness signed before the donor. I frowned. Is that unusual? It's impossible. I stared at the document. I never would have noticed. Erin continued, Look here. She enlarged the file even further. The affidavit had been scanned. Part of the paper showed a faint coffee stain. Another page attached to the transfer application contained the exact same stain in the exact same position. What does that mean? It suggests someone photocopied and reused paperwork instead of creating original signed documents. So whoever assembled this package wasn't very careful. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to hope. Not because the situation was improving, because mistakes leave evidence. Evidence tells stories, and stories are much harder to argue with than emotions. That afternoon, Erin contacted the title agency, requesting surveillance footage from the day the paperwork had been submitted. She warned me not to expect too much. Many businesses deleted recordings after 30 days. Fortunately, this application had been filed less than a week earlier. There was a good chance the footage still existed. While she worked on that, I drove to my mother's house. I hadn't planned to, but I needed to look her in the eye. Linda answered the door wearing gardening gloves. She looked almost surprised to see me. I thought you'd cool off. I have one question. Come inside. I'll stay here. Her expression tightened. What do you want? Did you forge my signature? She looked offended. I would never forge anything. You submitted paperwork saying I gifted my SUV. I helped with paperwork. Did you sign my name? She crossed her arms. That's not what matters. It matters to me. What matters is that Ashley needed help, and I didn't deserve to decide what happened to my own property. You would have said no." There it was. No denial, just justification. "You knew I would have refused. You've become so protective of everything. I worked for everything. So did your father and I." I blinked. "My SUV. We sacrificed to raise you." I suddenly understood the logic she had been using all along. She believed that because she had sacrificed during my childhood, every success I achieved as an adult still belonged at least partly to the family. Not legally, emotionally. To her, there was no line separating my life from theirs. "You think you're entitled to my property?" "I think families share blessings. I've shared plenty." "You've become cold." "No." I met her eyes. "I've become someone you can't volunteer anymore." For the first time, Linda looked genuinely hurt. Not because of what she'd done, because I had refused the role she'd assigned me. As I turned to leave, she spoke quietly. "If you report this, Ashley could lose everything." I stopped walking. Without turning around, I asked, "Did either of you think about what I could lose before taking my SUV?" She didn't answer. I drove away with my heart pounding. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Aaron. The title agency still has surveillance footage. A second message arrived before I could respond. "They're willing to preserve it for the investigation." Then 30 seconds later, a third message appeared. "Morgan, you're going to want to see who's carrying the folder when they walk through that front door." The next morning, Aaron and I met at the licensed title agency just outside Columbus. The manager greeted us with the cautious professionalism of someone who understood the seriousness of fraud allegations. "I've already secured the surveillance footage," he said. "Nothing has been deleted." He led us into a small conference room with a large monitor mounted on the wall. "I'll play the recording from the day the application was submitted." The timestamp appeared. 11:08 a.m. The front door opened. Ashley walked in first. She looked nervous, constantly adjusting the strap of her purse and glancing toward the parking lot through the glass entrance. Then my mother stepped inside. Linda wasn't nervous. She walked directly to the reception desk, carrying a thick blue expanding folder tucked under one arm. Aaron quietly paused the video. "Notice something." The folder, "Keep watching." The footage resumed. Linda opened the folder herself. Not Ashley. She removed one document after another, arranging them neatly across the counter. Vehicle title, registration, insurance paperwork, driver's license copy. She spoke almost the entire time. Ashley barely said a dozen words. When it came time to sign documents, the employee rotated the clipboard toward Ashley. Linda leaned over and pointed to each signature line before Ashley signed. Aaron froze the frame again. "Who's directing the transaction?" "Oh, my mother." "Exactly." We continued watching. Several minutes later, the employee disappeared into another office. Ashley looked pale. Linda reached over, squeezed her daughter's shoulder, and smiled reassuringly. Then she opened the folder again. She removed another sheet. This one never appeared on the public copies we'd received. The employee returned. Linda handed over the additional page. The employee glanced at it briefly before adding it to the stack. "What was that?" I asked. "I don't know yet," Aaron replied. "But I intend to find out." The video ended 27 minutes after it began. No one watching it could reasonably conclude Ashley had orchestrated the transaction. She had participated, but Linda had controlled it. The manager excused himself for a few minutes before returning with another envelope. "We received a legal preservation request from Ms. Sullivan yesterday," he said, handing it to Aaron. "These are certified copies of everything our office retained." Aaron thanked him. We waited until we were back in her office before opening the packet. Inside were photocopies of every page submitted that day, the forged gift affidavit, the transfer application, insurance information, registration paperwork. Then we found something neither of us expected. A customer intake form. Unlike the other documents, it hadn't required a signature. It simply asked basic questions. Who is requesting today's service? A handwritten answer filled the blank. Linda Davidson. I stared at it. I thought Ashley was supposed to be the recipient. So did I, Erin said. She continued reading. Relationship to current owner mother. Reason for transfer helping daughter during family hardship. Vehicle is being gifted willingly. I laughed bitterly. Willingly. Erin highlighted another line. Person providing supporting documentation, Linda Davidson. There it was. Not hidden. Not coded. My mother had identified herself as the person supplying every document needed to transfer my SUV. I don't understand, I said. If she was willing to write her own name, she probably believed she wasn't committing a crime. That sounded impossible. Erin shook her head. Intent isn't always as simple as good or bad. Some people convince themselves they're justified. They stop asking whether they're allowed to do something and start asking whether the outcome benefits someone they love. That doesn't make it legal. No, it doesn't. She organized the papers into separate piles. One pile establishes ownership, she pointed. One establishes unauthorized access. Another pile. One establishes the fraudulent transfer. Then she tapped the intake form. And this establishes who coordinated the process. For the first time since everything began, I could see the case taking shape. Not as scattered emotions, not as family drama, as evidence. Each document connected to the next. Each action left another footprint. My phone buzzed. Ashley. I looked at Erin. She nodded. Answer it. I placed the call on speaker. Morgan, Eve, I'm here. I need to tell you something. Her voice sounded completely different from the day before. Less defensive, more frightened. Mom doesn't know I'm calling. I'm listening. The SUV hasn't been sold. I know. But someone came to look at it yesterday. My heartbeat quickened. Who? A man from Cincinnati. Did he buy it? No. Why not? Ashley hesitated. He wanted to see the title first. I exchanged a glance with Erin, and Mom told him the paperwork would be finished in a few days. Finished. That word echoed through the room. If I hadn't opened that email from the BMV when I did, if I'd ignored it for another week, the SUV might already belong to someone else. Ashley continued quietly. I didn't realize she was actually trying to sell it that fast. You listed it online. I know. I thought we'd have more time. We, again. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? I kept telling myself we'd explain everything afterward. There was nothing to say to that. Eventually, I asked, Where's the SUV now? She hesitated. It's at Mom's friend Carol's property. Erin immediately wrote the name down. Why there? Mom said you wouldn't think to look. The call ended a minute later. Neither Erin nor I spoke immediately. Finally, she broke the silence. That's useful? Because we know where the SUV is. Because Ashley just confirmed something important. What? Your mother expected you to fight back. I frowned. What do you mean? If she hid the vehicle somewhere, you wouldn't think to check she wasn't acting impulsively. She was planning ahead. Exactly. That afternoon, Erin contacted local law enforcement and provided copies of the fraud report, the surveillance footage, and Ashley's statement regarding the vehicle's location. An officer explained that because ownership had not legally changed, recovering the vehicle would be significantly easier than untangling a completed fraudulent transfer. For the first time all week, I allowed myself to believe I might actually get my SUV back. Then Erin received an email from the title agency. She opened it silently, read it once, then read it again. "What is it?" I asked. She slowly turned her monitor toward me. Attached was a scanned copy of the one document Linda had handed over separately during the surveillance video. It wasn't another title form. It wasn't another affidavit. It was a letter. Typed neatly across the top were the words "to whom it may concern" below, that in language clearly intended to reassure anyone processing the paperwork was a sentence that made my stomach knot. "My daughter Morgan has agreed to transfer this vehicle voluntarily because she understands her sister's financial circumstances." At the bottom was another signature. My name, forged, again. I stared at the forged letter for several seconds before I spoke. "I've never written anything like this." "I know," Erin replied calmly. "What bothers me isn't just the signature." She zoomed in on the document. "The language." I leaned closer. The letter sounded strange, too formal, too polished. It didn't sound like me at all. It sounded like someone trying to imitate what they thought a responsible professional would write. "I don't use phrases like financial circumstances," I said. Erin smiled faintly. "Exactly." She pointed to another sentence. "As the older daughter, I gladly accept my responsibility to support my family." I almost laughed. "I would have never written that." "No." She looked directly at me. "But someone who has spent years telling you that's your responsibility might." The room fell silent. I knew exactly who she meant. Linda. Not because she was a criminal mastermind, because those were her words, her beliefs, her voice. Growing up, I'd heard them more times than I could count. "You're the older one. You have the stable job. Ashley needs more help. Family takes care of family." The forged letter wasn't just fake. It reflected the way my mother genuinely thought. That frightened me more than the forged signature. It meant she probably believed every word. Erin organized the newest documents into our growing evidence file. "So far," she said, "we've established several important facts." She held up one finger. "You own the SUV outright." A second finger. "Someone entered your home without permission." A third. "They removed documents necessary for a title transfer." Fourth. "Someone submitted forged paperwork." Fifth. "There's written evidence showing a deliberate attempt to persuade a third party that the transfer was voluntary." She closed the folder. "This is no longer about misunderstanding." I nodded. "I know." She looked thoughtful. "Now we need to understand motive." "I thought we already did." "Partly." "Ashley needed transportation." "That was the explanation." She shook her head. "Not necessarily the reason." There was a difference. One explained what they said. The other explained why they risked committing fraud. Erin picked up her phone. "I've requested records that may answer that question." "What records?" "Public financial filings for Ashley. And some property records." I frowned. "Can you do that?" "Certain information is publicly available. We aren't invading anyone's privacy." She paused. "We're verifying claims." By late afternoon, we had our answer. Not because someone leaked confidential information, because Ashley's financial situation had become part of public court filings during her divorce. Erin printed several pages. "They explain a lot." I scanned the documents. Ashley had fallen behind on her mortgage. She had accumulated over $40,000 in unsecured debt. Several credit card accounts were delinquent. One loan application had recently been denied. I looked up. "I knew things were difficult." "I don't think you knew they were this difficult." She was right. Ashley had always downplayed money problems. Whenever I offered to help budget or connect her with a financial planner, she laughed it off. She'd tell me everything was under control. Clearly it hadn't been. Then Erin slid another document across the desk. What am I looking at? A refinancing application. For her house? Yes. I read through it carefully. Income, expenses, assets. Then one line caught my attention. Available vehicle asset. Estimated value $34,500. I blinked. My SUV. Yes. It wasn't even legally hers. No. But someone expected it to be. I leaned back. So the SUV wasn't only transportation. No. It strengthened her financial profile. Erin nodded. It could have improved her chances of qualifying for refinancing. Everything suddenly fit together. The rushed paperwork, the forged gift, the attempt to transfer ownership before anyone noticed. The online listing. The plan had changed halfway through. If refinancing failed, they could sell the SUV. Either way, my vehicle solved Ashley's financial crisis, not because she'd earned it, because they believed they could take it. I rubbed my temples. I keep wondering when Mom decided this. Erin didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened another envelope. This arrived from your insurance company. Inside was a complete payment history for my policy. I glanced through it casually until one entry stopped me. Policy renewal payment. 1 year earlier. Paid electronically, but not from my checking account. What? I looked closer. The payment had come from a different bank account, an account ending in numbers I didn't recognize. Erin handed me another page. We asked the insurer to identify the payer. The account holder's name was listed underneath. Linda Davidson, my mother. I frowned. That can't be right. You don't remember? No. I always paid my insurance automatically, or at least I thought I did. Erin explained. You missed one renewal notice after changing banks. I remember changing banks. The payment deadline arrived. And your mother paid it. I searched my memory, then it came back. Linda had called me around that time, asking whether everything was okay because she'd received an insurance reminder at her address. Years ago, before buying my current house, I'd temporarily used my parents' address while relocating. Apparently, the insurer still had it on file. I'd thanked her for letting me know. She never mentioned paying anything. I offered to reimburse her. I don't know. I honestly don't remember. Erin folded her hands. That payment may explain her thinking. How? If she convinced herself she'd been financially contributing to the vehicle, she started believing she had some ownership? Exactly. Legally, it meant nothing. Emotionally, it may have justified everything in her mind. I stared out the office window, one forgotten insurance payment, one decision she never told me about. Had that become the foundation for this entire nightmare? As if reading my thoughts, Erin said quietly, people rarely wake up intending to commit fraud. They justify one small step, then another. And eventually, they're defending actions they would have condemned years earlier. I drove home exhausted. That evening, I found myself opening old family photo albums, Ashley and I riding bicycles, camping trips, Christmas mornings. There had been love. Real love. But looking back now, I also noticed a pattern I'd ignored for years. Whenever Ashley struggled, the family reorganized around rescuing her. Whenever I succeeded, the family reorganized around what I could give. I wasn't angry that Ashley had needed help. I was angry that my consent had never been considered necessary. At nearly 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Linda. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Morgan, I know you've been talking to lawyers. Yes. I need you to listen before you make another mistake. Another mistake. Not our mistake, mine. She continued before I could interrupt. I paid your insurance last year. I know. So don't act like I never invested in that vehicle. I closed my eyes. Mom. I protected that SUV when you forgot about it. I didn't forget about it. You would have lost your coverage. I would have fixed it. But I did. There it was. The justification. The one she'd been carrying all along. She genuinely believed that paying one insurance bill had given her the moral authority to decide the vehicle's future. Then she said something that made every conversation we'd had over the past week suddenly make sense. I thought after everything your father and I sacrificed raising you, you'd understand that sometimes what's yours has to help the family. I didn't raise my voice. I simply answered, I've spent my entire adult life helping this family. She didn't deny it. Instead, she quietly replied, I just never thought you'd choose a car over your sister. After we hung up, I sat in silence. Then my email chimed. A new message from Aaron had arrived. Subject, you'll want to see this before tomorrow. Attached was a copy of an email recovered during the investigation. The sender wasn't Ashley, it was Linda. And the recipient wasn't family, it was Ashley's financial advisor. I opened Aaron's email before I even took off my shoes. The attachment contained a chain of emails that had been preserved after Aaron issued legal requests related to the fraudulent transfer investigation. At the top was a note from Ashley's financial advisor. The advisor had responded because his office had received documents identifying my SUV as an asset connected to Ashley's refinancing package. His reply was brief. Before we proceed, we need confirmation that ownership has legally transferred. Below it was my mother's response, not Ashley's, Linda's. My stomach tightened as I read every word. The transfer is already in progress. My older daughter has agreed to help her sister. Everything should be finalized within the week. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no indication that she was doing anything improper. She wrote as though she genuinely believed she had authority to speak on my behalf. Aaron called while I was still staring at the screen. I figured you'd read it immediately. I did. What do you think? I think my mother convinced herself she was managing my life. I agree. She paused. But there's something even more important. What? The advisor never encouraged fraud. I frowned. He actually slowed the process. The first email asked for proof of legal ownership before moving forward. So he wasn't involved. No. He asked the right questions. That mattered. One of my biggest fears had been that several professionals had knowingly looked the other way. Instead, the paper trail showed something different. Every legitimate professional had requested documentation. My mother had responded by creating more documentation, fake documentation. The next morning I met Erin again. She had built a timeline across the conference table. Every event sat in chronological order. Friday, Linda entered my house. Friday afternoon, copies of my documents appeared in the title application. Monday morning, I discovered the SUV missing. Monday afternoon, fraud report filed. Wednesday, surveillance footage preserved. Thursday, financial records obtained. Seeing everything laid out like that made the situation strangely easier to understand. This wasn't chaos. It was a sequence. One decision leading to another. Aaron tapped a highlighted section. There's still one question. Which one? Why did your mother believe she'd get away with it? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I thought about every family gathering over the last decade. Every time I'd quietly paid for dinner because someone else had forgotten their wallet. Every birthday gift I'd purchased from the whole family. Every emergency expense I'd covered because Ashley was between jobs. every holiday where I'd been expected to host because my house was larger. No one had forced me, but no one had asked whether I wanted to. Eventually, people stop seeing generosity as generosity. They start seeing it as normal, expected. I looked at Erin. Because I always cleaned up the mess. She nodded slowly. And what happens when someone always cleans up the mess? Everyone assumes they always will. Exactly. That afternoon, I received another call from Ashley. This time I almost didn't answer, but something told me to listen. Morgan. Her voice sounded tired. I need to tell you something before Mom does. I'm listening. Ashley took a deep breath. The refinancing application has been denied. I wasn't surprised. The advisor said there wasn't enough verified documentation. I see. He also said if ownership of the SUV couldn't be confirmed, he couldn't count it. There it was, the real purpose of my vehicle. Not transportation, not convenience. Leverage. Ashley continued. I honestly thought once everything's settled, we'd explain it to you. I closed my eyes. You keep saying we. Silence. Then she whispered, I know. I need to ask you one question. Okay. If I hadn't seen that email from the BMV, she didn't answer. Ashley, I don't know. No. I spoke gently. You do know. Nearly 10 seconds passed before she finally said, I think Mom would have sold it. Not maybe, not possibly. Would've. I thanked her for telling me the truth. Then I ended the call. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ashley had answered without defending herself. It wasn't enough to undo what had happened, but it mattered. Late that afternoon, Erin called with another update. I've reviewed the insurance records more carefully. What did you find? The payment your mother made last year. Yes. It wasn't an accident? What do you mean? The insurer has a recording. A recording? Customer service. Every significant policy change had been recorded. Linda had called customer service herself. The representative asked whether she was the policyholder. Linda answered no. Then the representative explained that ownership wouldn't change simply because she made a payment. The recording confirmed she had been told exactly that. I felt my chest tighten. So she knew. Yes. She knew paying the premium gave her no ownership rights. Correct. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Until then, I'd still been holding on to a tiny hope that my mother genuinely misunderstood. That maybe she'd convinced herself she had some claim because she'd covered one bill. The recording erased that possibility. Someone had already explained the law to her. Clearly. In plain English. She simply chose not to believe it, or chose to ignore it. Erin spoke carefully. I don't enjoy saying this. I know. But intent matters. She can't honestly claim she didn't know. No. That evening, I drove to the storage facility where I'd moved several personal items after buying my house. I rented the unit years ago because I didn't like clutter. Inside were old boxes from college, tax returns, family photographs, childhood journals. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was looking for perspective. One plastic bin caught my attention. Written across the lid in black marker were the words Dad's files. My father had passed away 3 years earlier after a brief illness. He had rarely involved himself in conflicts between Mom, Ashley, and me. Mostly, he'd stayed quiet. At the bottom of the box tucked inside a manila envelope, I found something unexpected. A handwritten note in my father's familiar block lettering. It wasn't addressed to me specifically. It looked more like something he'd written for himself and never shared. One sentence stood out immediately. Linda always believes Morgan will understand, so Morgan is the one who pays the price. I sat on the concrete floor staring at those words. Dad had seen it, years before I did. Not just the money, not just the favors, the pattern, the expectation, the quiet assumption that I'd always carry more because I could. I carefully folded the note and slipped it back into the envelope. It wasn't legal evidence. It wouldn't change the investigation, but emotionally, it changed everything. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether I had somehow caused this. I hadn't. The pattern had existed long before the SUV. As I locked the storage unit and walked toward my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Aaron. The fraud investigator assigned to your case wants to interview both you and your mother tomorrow morning. A second message appeared almost immediately afterward. Linda has already called the investigator once today, without an attorney. I stared at the screen. Then the final message arrived. According to the investigator, she volunteered information nobody had even asked for. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid of meeting the fraud investigator. I was afraid of what my mother might have already said. People who panic often try to explain too much. They fill silence with details no one asked for, hoping one of those details will make them sound innocent. Sometimes it has the opposite effect. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Aaron and I walked into the investigator's office. The room wasn't intimidating. No bright lights. No detectives pounding on tables. Just a conference room with a recorder, a legal pad, and a man in his early 50s who introduced himself as David Mercer. "Good morning, Ms. Davidson." He shook my hand. "Miss Sullivan." Then he sat down and opened a thick file. "I appreciate you both coming in." He spoke with the calm, measured tone of someone who had spent years sorting facts from emotions. "I've already reviewed the documentation submitted by the Ohio BMV, the title agency, the insurance records, and the surveillance footage." He looked at me. "I understand this involves your immediate family." "Yes. I'm sorry." That simple sentence caught me off guard. He wasn't taking sides. He simply understood that investigations like this rarely ended with everyone going back to normal. He clicked on his recorder. "I'd like you to walk me through the timeline in your own words." For the next 40 minutes, I explained everything from beginning to end. The missing SUV, the phone call from my mother, the forged transfer, the security footage, the documents taken from my house, the fake gift affidavit, the listing for the SUV. Every answer I gave matched the documents already sitting in his file. When I finished, he nodded. "Thank you." Then he opened another folder. "This contains yesterday's interview with Linda Davidson." I looked at Erin. She remained expressionless. David didn't hand us the transcript. Instead, he summarized it. "Your mother described herself as the person coordinating the paperwork." I wasn't surprised. She repeatedly stated that you had agreed in spirit to help your sister. In spirit? Those were her words. He turned another page. "She also said she believed you would have approved eventually." I almost smiled. Eventually, as though my future forgiveness somehow replaced present consent. David continued. "When I asked whether she possessed written authorization from you, she answered no." I felt my shoulders relax slightly. That mattered. Then he said something neither Aaron nor I expected. "However," he paused, "she insisted she never intended to deceive anyone." I frowned. "How?" "She claimed the document simply helped move the process forward while waiting for your agreement." I stared at him. "But she forged my signature." "Yes." "And she told people I'd already gifted the vehicle." "Correct. So how is that not deception?" David folded his hands. "Intent and actions are evaluated separately." He wasn't defending her. He was explaining the process. The actions are documented. The explanation is hers, and they don't match. Exactly. He looked down at another page. "Now, I'd like to discuss Ashley Bennett." I straightened in my chair. She was interviewed this morning. What did she say? She admitted she signed transfer documents. I closed my eyes. There it was, out loud, officially. But she also stated that she believed ownership would only change after you personally confirmed everything. I frowned. She thought there would be another step. Apparently, that explained something I'd never understood. Ashley had always sounded guilty, but also confused. She hadn't been directing the process. She'd been following my mother's assurances. David continued. When asked whether she knew your signature had been forged, he stopped reading. She began crying. The room fell silent. Did she answer? Yes. He looked directly at me. She admitted she suspected the signature wasn't genuine. Suspected. Not knew, not verified, but suspected. And she signed anyway. Yes. I looked down at the table. Ashley wasn't innocent, but neither was she the architect. She had chosen denial because it was easier than asking difficult questions. David closed the file. Based on everything we've reviewed, he paused, there's a consistent pattern. What pattern? I asked. Every major decision originated with Linda Davidson. Even hearing an investigator say it out loud felt surreal. For weeks, I'd been trying to separate emotion from evidence. Now someone completely outside our family had reached the same conclusion. The interview ended shortly afterward. As Erin and I walked toward the parking lot, she finally spoke. How are you holding up? I don't know. You expected your mother to blame Ashley. I did. But she didn't. No. Instead, Linda had done something stranger. She'd accepted responsibility for organizing everything while continuing to insist she'd done nothing morally wrong. That was somehow harder to process. She hadn't acted out of hatred. She'd acted out of entitlement. She truly believed she had the right to rearrange my life if she thought it benefited the family. On the drive home, my phone rang. It was Ashley. For several seconds, I watched it ring before answering. Morgan! Her voice was hoarse. I told them the truth. I know. I should have stopped Mom. Yes. I kept telling myself she'd worked everything out. You wanted to believe that? I did. She took a shaky breath. When they showed me copies of the paperwork, her voice cracked. I realized how many lies I'd accepted without reading anything. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I'm sorry isn't enough. No, it isn't. I know. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply accepted the answer. Before hanging up, she said one last thing. Whatever happens next, don't let Mom convince you this was your fault. I stood in my kitchen for several minutes after the call ended. Those words meant more than she probably realized. For my entire life, every conflict eventually circled back to me. If I were more patient, more generous, less stubborn, more understanding. Somehow the solution always involved me giving up something. Not this time. That afternoon, David Mercer called with one final update. I wanted you to hear this directly from me. I'm listening. The Ohio BMV has officially voided the pending ownership transfer. I closed my eyes. So it's over. The transfer process is over. And my SUV? Your ownership has been fully restored. For the first time in weeks, I felt my body relax. Not because justice had completely arrived, but because the thing I'd worked so hard to protect legally belonged to me again. David continued. There are still administrative matters involving the fraudulent paperwork. I understand. But as far as the vehicle is concerned, it remains yours. I thanked him and ended the call. Erin smiled when I told her. That's the news we've been waiting for. It was. But before either of us could celebrate, her email notification chimed. She glanced at the screen, then her expression changed. "What is it?" I asked. She slowly turned the monitor toward me. "It's from your mother." "My mother emailed you." "Yes." The subject line read, "Please ask Morgan to forgive me before it's too late." Below it was only one sentence. I finally understand that I didn't lose my daughter because of the SUV. I lost her because I stopped believing she deserved the same respect I expected for Ashley. Erin looked at me quietly. "I think this is the first completely honest thing she's written." I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Because forgiveness and trust had never been the same thing. And for the first time in my life, I finally understood the difference. For the first time in weeks, my driveway didn't make my heart race. My SUV was back where it belonged. The sheriff's deputy had met me 2 days earlier at Carol Whitaker's property, a small horse farm about 40 minutes outside Columbus. Carol had cooperated immediately. She looked genuinely confused when the deputy explained why we were there. "I thought Linda said Morgan wanted to keep it here until everything with Ashley settled." I simply nodded. "I never said that." Carol's face fell. "Oh," she stepped back. I'm sorry." She handed over the keys without another word. The SUV looked exactly as I'd left it. The same reusable grocery bags in the cargo area. The same charging cable hanging beside the center console. The same parking pass clipped to the visor. Someone had driven it less than 200 miles. It wasn't damaged. Nothing had been stolen. But as I slid into the driver's seat, I didn't feel relief. I felt something much harder to explain. Violation. This vehicle had once represented years of hard work. Now it also represented every boundary my family believed they could cross. I drove straight to the dealership. Not because anything was mechanically wrong. Because I wanted every physical key, every digital access code, and every remote authorization erased. The service manager listened carefully. I'd like every programmed key removed from the system. Even the spares. "Especially the spares," he nodded. "We'll reprogram everything." I also updated my online account, changed every password connected to the vehicle, and removed every device that had ever been paired with it. When I finally drove home that afternoon, it felt like my SUV belonged to me again, not just legally, practically, emotionally. The next morning, Erin called. "The Ohio BMV has finalized its administrative review." I figured they already had. They've officially invalidated every document connected to the attempted transfer. So none of it exists anymore. "It exists," she smiled, "but only as evidence." That distinction mattered. The fraudulent paperwork wasn't erased, it was preserved. Not as proof I'd gifted my SUV, as proof that I hadn't. Later that afternoon, I met Erin one last time to review everything before the investigation formally closed. She handed me a neatly organized binder. Inside were copies of every important document. The original purchase records, the fraud report, security camera stills, the smart lock activity log, insurance records, the title agency surveillance images, the forged gift affidavit, the forged letter, the BMV determination. Each page represented a decision, not mine, theirs. Erin closed the binder. "I recommend keeping copies in more than one place." "I will. And one more thing." She looked at me carefully. "You asked me during our first meeting whether this could be solved inside the family." "I remember." "What do you think now?" I thought about it for a long moment. If I hadn't involved professionals, I looked down at the binder. There wouldn't have been a family left to save. She nodded quietly. Sometimes accountability is the only thing that gives people the chance to change. As I left her office, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Not a call. A text. "Can we please meet just once? No lawyers. No arguing." I stared at it for several minutes before answering. Finally, I typed, "Public place." "1 hour. That's all I can offer." She replied almost immediately, "Thank you." We met 2 days later at a small coffee shop near a public library. Neutral ground, no childhood memories, no family photographs, no emotional advantage. Linda was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived. She looked older than she had a month earlier, not physically, emotionally. The confidence she'd carried through this entire ordeal had disappeared. "I didn't know if you'd come. I said I would." For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, she reached into her purse and slid a sealed envelope across the table. "I wrote this. I'm listening. I'd rather you read it later." I nodded and placed it beside my coffee. Then she surprised me. She didn't begin by defending herself. She didn't blame Ashley. She didn't criticize lawyers. Instead, she looked directly at me. "I've spent weeks asking myself when I stopped treating you fairly." I said nothing. "I think it happened so slowly that I never noticed." She looked down at her hands. "You were always responsible. You paid your own bills. You solved your own problems. You never asked us for much." She swallowed, "And because of that," she paused, "I kept asking you for more." The words landed harder than I expected, not because they erased what she'd done, because they described it perfectly. She continued, "I convinced myself Ashley needed protecting. I convinced myself you didn't." She wiped her eyes. "I forgot that strong people still deserve respect." For several seconds, I simply watched her. I believed she meant every word. That didn't mean everything could go back to normal. "Mom," she looked up, "I appreciate hearing that." She nodded hopefully. "But I need you to understand something." "I'm listening." "I can forgive you someday." "I hope you will." "But forgiveness doesn't mean you get access to my home." Her smile faded slightly. "It doesn't mean you get a key." She nodded slowly. "It doesn't mean you make decisions for me." "I understand." "It doesn't mean you speak for me." "I know." "And it doesn't mean things go back to the way they were." She lowered her eyes. "I think I knew that before I came." For the first time since everything began, neither of us argued. We simply accepted reality. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. "Will you ever trust me again?" I answered honestly. "I don't know." She nodded once. "That's fair." As I walked toward my car, I felt lighter. Not because everything had been repaired, because I'd finally stopped carrying responsibility for fixing everyone else's choices. That evening, I opened the envelope Linda had given me. Inside was a handwritten letter. Most of it spoke about regret, about my father, about mistakes she'd only recognized after strangers questioned decisions she'd always believed were normal. Near the end, one paragraph stood out. "Your father used to tell me that every time Ashley stumbled, I reached for you instead of teaching her to stand. I argued with him for years. I wish I had listened." I read the sentence 3 times. Then I carefully folded the letter and placed it inside the same binder that held every piece of evidence from the investigation. Not because it erased those documents, but because it belonged with them. It was the final piece of the story, the first honest acknowledgement that what happened hadn't started with one missing SUV. It had started years earlier with expectations that no one had questioned. Just as I closed the binder, my phone buzzed with a message from Aaron. "Congratulations. The agency has officially closed the fraud investigation." A second message followed. "No further action is required from you unless you choose to pursue civil damages." I looked at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed back, "I'm done fighting. I just want to move forward. 6 months later, my life looked remarkably ordinary, and after everything that had happened, ordinary felt like a luxury. Most mornings started the same way. I made coffee, watered the herbs growing on my back patio, checked my calendar before heading to work. My SUV still sat in the driveway every morning, but it no longer reminded me of what I'd almost lost. It reminded me of something much more valuable: boundaries. A month after the investigation closed, I sold the house where my mother still had an old spare key years earlier. There was nothing wrong with the neighborhood, nothing wrong with the house. I simply wanted a place that belonged entirely to the life I was building now. I bought a smaller home closer to my office. The first weekend after moving in, I changed every lock before unpacking a single box. I installed a new security system. Created unique passwords for every account connected to my home, my vehicle, and my finances. Updated emergency contacts. Changed mailing addresses. Reviewed every insurance policy. None of it came from fear anymore. It came from experience. People often asked whether all of those changes made me feel paranoid. The truth was exactly the opposite. Preparation gave me peace. Without constant worry, I could finally stop looking over my shoulder. Work became easier too. The promotion I'd been working toward for nearly 2 years finally came through. Not because of what happened with my family, because for the first time in a long time, my energy wasn't consumed by cleaning up someone else's problems. Daniel, my director, congratulated me after the announcement. "You seem different." "I am." "You carry yourself differently." I smiled. I stopped apologizing for having boundaries. He laughed. "I've noticed." That single sentence stayed with me for days. People treated me differently because I was finally teaching them how to. Ashley called occasionally during those first few months. Our conversations were short, careful, respectful. She never asked for money, never hinted at needing another favor. Instead, she talked about practical things. She had taken a second job working evenings for a local medical billing company. She'd met with a nonprofit financial counselor. She'd sold furniture she couldn't afford to keep. Little by little, she started paying off her debt herself. One afternoon, she surprised me. "I finally understand something." "What?" "I spent years believing people were helping me." She paused. "They were actually preventing me from growing." I thought about that after we hung up. Helping and rescuing aren't always the same thing. Sometimes rescuing simply delays responsibility. Ashley still had difficult days, but they were her days, her choices, her victories, and somehow our relationship became healthier because neither of us expected the other to solve life's problems anymore. My relationship with Mom changed much more slowly. For several months, we only exchanged birthday cards and occasional text messages. Nothing more. She never complained, never asked for another key, never showed up uninvited. One Saturday morning, she asked if I'd like to meet for breakfast. I agreed. We met at the same small cafe where we'd spoken months earlier. This time, the conversation felt different, lighter. Not because the past had disappeared, because neither of us was pretending it hadn't happened. Halfway through breakfast, Mom reached into her purse. I smiled instinctively. "Another letter." She laughed softly. "No." She placed a small brass key on the table. I looked at it. "I found this while cleaning." It was the old key to my previous house, the one she'd kept for years. I should have given it back a long time ago. I picked it up. Neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "I finally understand something your father tried to teach me." I waited. Loving your children doesn't mean managing their lives. I felt tears gathering in my eyes. It means respecting that they have lives of their own. For the first time in a very long time, I believed her. Not because of her words, because of her actions over the previous 6 months. Real change had happened long before that breakfast. It had happened every time she chose not to interfere. Every time she accepted a boundary without arguing. Every time she treated me like an adult instead of a resource. When we stood to leave, she hugged me. It wasn't the kind of hug that erased history. It was the kind that acknowledged it. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." And for the first time, neither of us added a condition to those words. A few weeks later, Erin invited me to lunch after learning I'd received my promotion. She smiled as soon as I sat down. "You look happier." "I am. You know what I find interesting?" "What?" "You won." I shook my head. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "No." "I didn't win because Mom admitted she was wrong." I stirred my iced tea. "I didn't win because the investigation ended." "So what was the victory?" I smiled. I stopped believing it was my job to keep everyone comfortable at my own expense. Erin leaned back. "I like that answer." "So do I." As I drove home that afternoon, I stopped at a red light and glanced toward the passenger seat. The binder Erin had given me months earlier was still there. Not because I needed to carry it everywhere. I had been cleaning out my office. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. Then I decided against it. Not because I wanted to remember the pain, because I wanted to remember the lesson. Evidence matters. Boundaries matter. Consent matters. And love without respect eventually becomes control. When I pulled into my driveway, the evening sun reflected across the windshield of my SUV. The same vehicle that had nearly divided my family forever. Ironically, it no longer felt like the most important thing I had protected. The most important thing was my voice. No one could sign it away. No one could borrow it. No one could decide how it should be used. That belonged to me. It always had. I just finally understood it. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't begin with stolen money, forged documents, or missing property. They begin with a belief that one person's needs always matter more than another's. If you've spent years being the reliable one in your family, you may have convinced yourself that carrying everyone else's burdens is simply part of loving them. But healthy love is never built on entitlement. It is built on respect, honesty, and consent. Setting boundaries isn't an act of revenge. It isn't punishment. It's a way of protecting your peace while still leaving room for compassion. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited access to your life again. You can wish them well without handing back the keys literally or emotionally. Rebuilding trust requires consistent actions over time, and sometimes the healthiest relationship is one with clear limits that everyone understands. If you've ever been expected to sacrifice simply because you were the responsible one, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may encourage someone else who feels alone. And if stories about family resilience, justice, and healing speak to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and join me for more. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.